Hi. This edition, we've got Charles Betz, who is actually a principal researcher analyst with the Forrester Group. So he's got an illustrious career across several large and small companies, a consulting career. He's been an adjunct faculty at St. Thomas University. He was the primary author of the Digital Practioners's Body of Knowledge. He's an author of the book called Managing Digital, and another book called Architecture Patterns in IT, and so on. So we would listen to him today on his rich experience, his journey, and what has taken him to get there, and delve into his work on IT for IT, digital practitioners, body of knowledge, and his primary focus is service management, and his research mostly is around DevOps and ITSM and service management topics. So probably we'll touch upon that as well if time does permit. So welcome, Charles. I've been a follower of you on LinkedIn, and primarily you work with the open group on the DPBoK, that is Digital Practitioners Body of Knowledge. So if you could quickly run us through, your journey as to how you landed into your current role at Forrester. In between, you were into consulting gigs, and prior to that, you were actually you worked with several large and small companies in vice president roles and senior leadership roles. So how's your journey been? I think you could walk us through that.
Okay. Well, it's great to be here, Karen. Thanks again for the opportunity to have a conversation. So, well, I started using computers in junior high school, and I'm maybe a little older than I look. So we were using teletypes printing on yellow paper to log into shared mainframes with what was called the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium, which is a very obscure name, but some of your listeners may know the name Oregon Trail, which is a famous computer game from back in the day of being a pioneer in a covered wagon traveling out west in the United States to Oregon, to the West Coast. And this game was written by the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium, which also provided me my first computing experience in junior high. I didn't do a lot with computers after junior high, but...
this was way back in the year?
This is, oh, you're going to ask me how old I am, huh?
I'm tricking you into revealing your age.
1976, I was in junior high.
Oh, okay.
I graduated high school in 1980.
Oh,
and so I didn't do a lot with computers during college years, but by the time I was done with my college career, the Macintosh and the PC had started to become widely established, and of course, I wrote my final papers on a PC and then a Mac. And I also started to develop an interest in spreadsheets and desktop databases. Now, I did not study computer science. I studied political science. And with the political science, I went into a activist organization, and I needed a database, and I had an aptitude for programming a computer. And so I programmed desktop database, FileMaker Pro, still out there. And from there, I launched into a position with end user support, the help desk. Like many technologists start on the help desk. I was part of the help desk, and also running around a building and providing on-site support. And then that led to an IT management position, which led to a role with Anderson Consulting. And then that led to a position with Target Corporation as a data modeler. And then I went to Best Buy to help run, because as a data modeler, I became interested in the problem of metadata, a problem of the data that describes the data that describes the systems. And this was the beginning of a lifelong passion for the general problem of the business of IT. And that's why my book, the green book here, Architecture and Patterns for IT, is subtitled Making Shoes for the Cobbler's Children, because it became obvious to me that while we were automating the supply chain and the customer relationship management, the IT organization itself had very poor systems based on spreadsheets and emails. And with that realization, I went on to Best Buy. And at that point, I decided to get serious, and I pursued a master's degree in software engineering.
I think, sorry to interrupt you, Charles, that's a fantastic analogy that the cobbler's children themselves walk barefooted. So basically,
it's true.
What you're trying to say is IT systems were in a desperate need of a good overall, and while they were catering to other businesses, they were not taking care of running their businesses itself efficiently, right? That's what you intended.
Exactly.
Okay. I haven't read that book. Probably I'll get to read that sometime, someday.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon.
Sure. Okay.
And I became interested in topics like CMDB, like portfolio management, systems management and monitoring, all of the systems we need to manage and run the systems, which is kind of a meta problem, if I can use that word. The systems that run the systems.
Just a thought, what gave you the trigger to write a book way too early in your career? Was there something that triggered you saying, this is where I need to, you had something planned, or it just came out as a natural sequence?
It kind of came, I had started blogging as soon as blogs were, as soon as blogs became a thing, I started writing because I had a passion for what I called originally the convergence of metadata and IT service management. And in fact, that's what I wrote my master's paper on, was the convergence that I felt needed to happen to actually run digital systems effectively. And interest in that convergence then led me to a position as the lead or chief architect for the business of IT at Wells Fargo. Now, many other architects had, various roles to play in this, but for the longest time, I was the central point of focus for the question of, well, what do we use the CMDB for at Wells Fargo, and what do we use the portfolio management processes and data stores for, and how does this all fit together with the systems management domain, and how do we serve the interests of capacity management and asset management, all software asset management, all of these things I kept getting called into, as well as playing a significant role as the chief architect on the application decommissioning program. I was the program architect for that, and then that morphed into chief architect for portfolio rationalization for the bank. And like I said, there were always many other architects involved, and I was, of course, not the chief architect for the bank. And there were, there were other architects that certainly outranked me. But when people had problems of just how are we going to fit these particular class of internal IT systems together, I was the one who had the most comprehensive understanding and was called in to consult and provide guidance on a wide variety of topics. And I always approach things from an architecture perspective, which is why I wrote the book, because it is an architecture. It's an enterprise architecture of the business of IT. And it, of course, reflects heavily what was in my head. It didn't actually, I didn't copy any, deliverables from my employers. That would have been inappropriate. But it's all rattling around in my head. So I redrew everything in a generic way and made it a bit.
And one small interruption. When you say CMDB, you're responsible for CMDB. Was it the current state of affairs, like the way what's done in ServiceNow and with all the IT best practices and ITSM best practices? Pretty much at that level. Okay.
Yes, yeah, the CMDB stands for Configuration Management Database, and I was given a task, make the CMDB work.
Oh.
And it was a very challenging task because while they proposed the idea of the CMDB, they got it wrong in significant ways that still cause confusion in the industry to this day.
True. Actually, yes, I had an experience with one of the clients on the CMDB thing. When I went and talked to them, they said they raised tickets in one part of it, the fix them in another one, all the asset managements and the NOC inventories in another place. So it's all completely in silos, even today in very large companies. And just to get all of them wired up to have an end-to-end picture is so difficult on the dashboard. And they're like always firefighting stuff to, and in the name
Yeah.
of big processes, they have got a fantastic process. They've got ServiceNow, they've got Remedy and all that. But the complaint is nothing runs, everything is in silos, like, pretty much.
Yeah, it's hard. You need a data architecture, and that's the problem with the CMDB. So another thing that I found, so I mentioned that I did the metadata repository at Target, and I was a data architect there. That gave me a critical grounding in my career. It led me to the world of the data management domain. And there's actually professional organizations. There's the Data Management Association, DAMA, www.dama.org, D-A-M-A. And this is the organization that publishes the DPBoK, the Data Management Body of Knowledge, which we reference in the DPBoK. The DPBoK's part of the role of the DPBoK is to bring things together. And so the DPBoK actually specifies what is best practice in data architecture and data quality, data governance. And when you talk about silos, that's exactly because nobody has probably gone into that CMDB in that organization with a true data management, data architecture perspective. And that is what is the fundamental lack in the CMDBs today.
There's no correlation, or there's no schema relation between the assets in that. So it's a random set of assets and inventories and logistics and artifacts that are lying there. They're not connected to another. There's no workflow around it, which is all tied up. So this is exactly one of the pain points that I got to see at close quarters at a very big company, which is very big in terms of their process. But still, they said most of the time, 20-25 guys are firefighting these issues on their network operations center.
Well, if they're a Forrester customer, send them to us, because we consult and advise on CMDB, and I'll be so bold as to say I think we've got the best offerings, the best understanding in the world on this topic at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a hard problem, and not that I'm here to sell, but since it came up, I'll
True. You do wear the Forrester analyst hat as well, so.
I do. I am Forrester analyst as well as faculty. Now, after Wells Fargo, I took and this is one of the pieces of career advice I would give people: be broad. When you feel like you've learned as much as you can in a given environment, then move away. And I took a pay cut, and I became an industry analyst with Enterprise Management Associates. An industry analyst is very different from being a technologist. You have to write. You've got to research. You've got to write, which is why I do not ever regret my bachelor's of arts in the political science. Because that taught me how to write, it taught me how to think, it taught me how to analyze. And these are all critical skills if you want to make the jump over into being an industry analyst. But if you come into being an industry analyst and you also have hands-on technical abilities, then that's going to do very well for your career, because some industry analysts, they have backgrounds in journalism, they can write, but they've never actually operated computers. And then they have to then spend a lot of time really understanding the technology. If the technology has been very real for you, if you've lived on conference bridges, you've seen incidents, you've seen Black Fridays at various retailers, it's hard to find a substitute for that kind of direct experience. And
true. I think I just saw your code recipes and your class exercises in the DPBoK, wherein you got shared examples of GitHub repositories and Vagrant on how to spin up a Vagrant, using Vagrant, how you can spin up virtual instances and virtual machines and all that. So which is very different from the style that's typically taught in the academic world. I think I appreciate you for that, because it's a very practical course as you put it out there, the digital you're managing digital initial course, I think, which is taught at the
we have a practical component to it, but it also gets into the theory. And so this is, I think, the best of both worlds. The book, the DPBoK, which, as you correctly note, is based on the textbook Managing Digital, the Digital Practitioner Body of Knowledge, which is an international industry standard maintained as an open source product by the Open Group under open community governance, and there is no other product like it. There are commercial products out there, such as SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, and ITIL, which is owned by Axelos, which is now a commercial entity. But the DPBoK is absolutely open, and it is free for download. And of course, if you want to participate in evolving it, then you need to join the open group. And if you want to use it commercially as a trainer, you have to either license it or join the open group, which then provides you the license.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, Charles, because I have the license for DPBoK.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
I have
great.
that.
And so we talk very deeply about the theory. We talk about coordination problem. We talk about, you know, why it's important to understand when things are computable versus not. We talk about organization and the leading research and how organizations function and the fundamental principles of governance, you know, the three-party model. What is an auditor? You know, what is the auditor trying to do? And all of these things are grounded in deep research that explains.
I really liked your analogy of comparing the CEO, the hotel analogy, wherein the hotel owner wants to take on vacation and then he appoints a manager and pay. So that's exactly how a CEO and the board works. That was fantastic.
Right.
I mean, that analogy was brilliant, actually.
Yeah, and you know, I got that from he's mentioned, he's credited in the book. I mean, that comes from Brian. I can't remember his last name. Great guy that gave a great talk at an ISACA conference I attended. But you're right. I mean, that's the difference between management and governance. If you're directing employees, do this, do that, do the other thing, you're managing. But if you need to go away for 6 months and hire a manager to make sure that everything happens, then you're in the question of governance. How do I trust that manager, especially when they're going to have more information than me? And this is the basis of assurance and audit. And if you do not understand this, then that IT auditor shows up and who are you? And why is my boss scared of you? And why do I need to answer your questions? And I think it's very important for my students to go out and understand the fundamental reasons, the goal of why the auditor is even there. And so that is, again, that gets back. And information, similarly, information management becomes an enormous problem at scale. I mean, that's one of the things with the DPBoK is we built it on the scaling model. And the scaling model is a different way of thinking about the problem of teaching and how you explain IT to stakeholders. You know, maybe if I recap, you know, we have, you know, I could bring up some slides. Would that help, or would that be appropriate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if that helps the conversation, we could do that actually.
Maybe can you
edit? I think I need to edit. Yeah, if you can send me, I'll put it up at this point in the video.
Well,
I'll write it down. What exact slides are there? I think.
Well, no, I can just share my screen.
Okay. 1 second. Let me just pause.
That would be ideal.
Let me just make you the presenter.
The digital practitioner body of knowledge. We had to think about how to structure it, and the question of scale became so important. Previously, we teach computer science using the stack, right?
True. And, yeah.
You know, the
7-layered stack, OSI stack.
Right. Or there's other ways of thinking about the stack. In formal computer science, you'll start with logic that leads you to discrete math and more logic, and then you get into you know, automata theory and compilers and programming languages, and then all of that, and then you move up into applications of that. And it's all, you know, in fact, you know, we teach science that way. You start with fundamentals and you build up from there. But you know, the trouble is that's a very long process. And you also can be reductionist. When you think in terms of the stack, I mean, you might say, somebody might say, well, you know, networking is merely an application of computing fundamentals. And so if you understand computing fundamentals, therefore understanding networking should be trivial. and any network engineer will say, you're crazy, you know.
True, true.
Same thing as if you start at the top of the stack and you say, I have,
Yeah,
yeah,
I've resumed the recording, so we can go ahead.
okay, yep. And so you have you know, the idea that it's simple to build the layer above yours. That's reductionist. It's also, you also have the problem of people saying, well, I have a business problem. Solve it with the computer. It's just an application of that technology. You should be able to solve the computer easily and solve my problem with the computer easily. And of course, that's not so easy, as we know. You may run into surprises, starting with the fact, is the problem even computable?
True.
So we also see in software engineering programs that we focus on the life cycle. The life cycle is plan, build, run. And this is baked into many curriculum.
Yeah, this is the waterfall-ish kind of model, right?
It's waterfall. And notice that today, even now, even in this day and age, you'll go to a software engineering program and they will have a course on requirements management. They'll have a course on architecture, which fits under analysis. You'll have a couple courses on learning programming languages. You'll have a separate course on testing and QA. And then you'll have you probably won't have a course on operations because they don't teach that, which is really a problem in the modern day and age, because operations are becoming absolutely critical to an operational experience is becoming absolutely critical to being an effective technologist. And the fact that operations are not taught in school, I think is a big problem.
Yeah, I think, Charles, at this point of time, you also highlighted that people who come out of grad schools, they also don't know things like source control, version control, and all of that sort of stuff, which is quite good. Because when I was first reading the DPBoK, I was like, why are we mentioning source control? This is all so done for us, like guys who spent years in IT, like source control, version control. But then later on, I could chance upon the fact that, you know, you had targeted for guys who coming fresh out of the grad schools. So it made absolute sense there, correct?
Right. Or practitioners, you know, so take a 50-year-old database administrator or a systems administrator.
Even they won't have that information, correct?
They've just been using the mouse, you know, and,
true.
and they have not had to use source control, but now with infrastructure as code, they need to be using source control.
True.
And so we have a whole bunch of people who are in the middle of their careers and a whole bunch of people on the infrastructure and operations side who need to learn about source control, because source control is so important because it is the constraint that enables. It is the fundamental technical practice upon which all other agile technical practices are built, and that's those are my words.
That's the very backbone of the IAC, as you said, infrastructure as code, and the DevOps, and then finally site reliability engineering, which it actually branches into.
Any of it, you can't do any of it without source control. So I compare source control to like the germ theory of disease and the importance of washing your hands if you're a doctor or a nurse in the healthcare setting. Well, it's important for everybody to wash their hands, but obviously, you know, for a graduate to come out of especially a master's program and not understand the importance of source control is like somebody coming out of a medical school and not understanding the importance of washing their hands and how to do it practically, as well as the theory of why we do it. You know, that is, you know, this is why I think that, you know, there's a lot we can learn from medical school in terms of how we educate the digital practitioner.
Absolutely. I think one analogy when you said that, I just remembered. So one guy was mentioning about the importance of checklists. And then if you were to say checklists are all good for governance, you need to do these things in this order. So it's so boring. But if you storytell around the same thing and say that, as you said, germ practitioner who's treating a pandemic in a critical ward, if he doesn't follow the checklist, then it's a question of life and death, and that person can spread the pandemic to a larger audience. So if you say it in that way, as you said, that's a very good way to educate digital practitioners.
Yes, and I'm a big fan of the Checklist Manifesto. It's a great.
Is there one? Is there one like a Checklist Manifesto?
Yeah. It's by a gentleman named Atul Gawande. Who was, you know, I really like the Checklist Manifesto because it talks about where checklists work and where they don't. Because
Oh,
some problems cannot be reduced down to a checklist. And when you need a checklist, you need a checklist. And they're an important tool, but they're only a tool. And this is where, you know, you have to think carefully about what the broader problem is that you're trying to
so
solve.
if you don't follow it in essence, then you can game the system as well and create false statistics.
Yes, yes.
True.
And so in thinking about the structure, getting back to the structure of the DPBoK, I said, okay, I can't base it on the stack and I can't base it on the life cycle. They're both limited. And so I started to think about the problem of complex systems and the fact that complex systems that work are invariably, famous quote by John Gall, they're invariably found to have evolved from simple systems that work. And so
I think this goes back to the same kind of thing. Like if something has to be reusable, first it has to be usable. Only then it can be reusable. So only if something has to scale, then it has to scale at least at a micro level. Then only you can take it to a macro level.
Right.
Very bang on, correct.
And here's the thing. The student's understanding is also a small system. And so you have to give the student a basic understanding of what works that then they can scale up. And this is exactly how I teach my class. We start with one very small microservice that all it does is make calls to itself and provide back the a basic timestamp. But you can build so much with a simple microservice like that. You can actually build a system of considerable complexity. Because you can extend the service horizontally, you can spin up multiple copies, they can call each other, and pretty soon you have a whole mesh of microservices. They're not doing much of anything interesting, but the point for the class is that it's about operating them. We don't really care what the system is doing, we care how it's operating. And that's how we think at the control plane level. And so I used that thinking to come up with what I call the emergence model. And the emergence model is based on what we call the scaling structure from startup to enterprise. So we start with the individual founder looking at the very pragmatic questions of what am I trying to do, what's my platform, what's my programming language, how do I build an application? And I think that this is one thing that differentiates the DPBoK from many other bodies of knowledge, is the other bodies of knowledge, they start at a very high level. They start at the beginning of the life cycle with strategy, for example. Now, when ITIL v3 came out, the service strategy volume itself is like 500 pages. And I know so many people who started reading it and got about 80 pages in and then just said, the heck with it, I'm not going to do that. Because it was written for corporate strategists operating in enormous enterprises, which is not people's everyday experience. It's certainly not the everyday experience of my students. My goodness, to tell my students start with, you know, volume 1 of ITIL v3 and read all 5 volumes, there's no way that ever would have worked. Nor, to be honest, did my architecture and patterns book work, because that was also written from the perspective of multiple architecture perspectives. So you have a data perspective, a process perspective, a systems perspective, a functional perspective, and you matrix all these things together, but it's a lousy way to teach students. I found out this the hard way because I tried, you know.
True.
So what I thought was thinking, well, how do we teach the students? And it gets back to this. We have to iteratively increase their knowledge from a fundamental base that makes sense.
Actually, there have been efforts in the open group. I do remember on similar lines of thought that we should have a one-man EA team, that is an enterprise architecture team, and you have addressed it brilliantly, like saying that it's too early for a startup to worry about governance and compliance and even a formal architecture, for instance. He's just about,
you don't have any of that stuff.
Yeah, he just cares about just running things and making the rubber meet the road, that kind of stuff. So he's just getting it to that point and nothing beyond that.
Then you go into the team of teams, and the enduring enterprise. True. The enduring enterprise, you do have to consider governance. And so this is how we wound up putting it all together, to actually talk through it. Yes, you have an individual and a founder who cares about fundamentals and infrastructure and app delivery. That's
Yeah,
the
I think,
IT.
Charles, sorry to interrupt you. I just had a query. You just mapping the DPBoK to the IT for IT,
Yes,
artifacts, pretty much the four portfolios which are there. So was that an afterthought to link them together, or while you were, because you're part of both the boards?
I was thinking about it. So I started off with IT for IT.
Okay, okay,
And that was actually, we never got through my whole career, but when I was at EMA, I got invited to join the IT for IT consortium, and I played
true.
a role in bringing the IT for IT consortium into the open group as the IT for IT forum, which was a good decision and has been very successful. Um,
I think
and
you also contributed to Gene Clem's Phoenix project as a reviewer very early on, I suppose.
Yes, I did.
True.
I did contribute to it because when I was at Wells Fargo, I would go to industry conferences, and at one of these conferences, I met Gene, and we
Okay.
started up a correspondence. This was before DevOps.
True,
This was
true.
this was when we were still thinking that IT service management was the way forward and would
Uh-huh.
solve our problems.
Correct, correct,
And then
correct.
and then we saw that this Silicon Valley companies weren't using IT service management at all, and
Very
instead
true.
had developed their own method that was much more successful.
In fact, when
Um,
I do teach enterprise architecture at a couple of workshops, guys ask me like, does Google use TOGAF, or Google is do they have any formal enterprise architecture? Exactly the point that you raised. And the Bay Area companies are very much focused on the reality and getting things off the ground. And yeah, these can become very loaded terms if not addressed
yeah,
the right way.
yeah, no, I would say that the Bay Area companies, they may not use TOGAF, but they have an architecture.
Very true, very true.
And if you want to learn how to, I mean, not everybody can go work at Google. And
True.
so to have some methods that help people understand, I think is still important. So the methods have to change, which is why we have the open agile architecture framework now with the open group, because the methods are adapting to the new learnings coming out of Silicon Valley. But somebody needs to codify those things. Somebody needs to write them down so that other people can learn, because otherwise what option do you have? If you can't go work at Google, then how are you going to learn?
True, true,
And
true.
so this is the role, I think, of especially nonprofit organizations to step forward and say, okay, we're going to start curating this body of knowledge. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the DPBoK.
Now, this
And
process of linking the DPBoK with the IT for IT
yes,
happened because you were on both the boards, or it was an
yes.
afterthought? Was it an afterthought,
No, no,
or was
no.
it?
I was on both. I was
Okay, okay,
with IT for IT, and the thought, I just kept thinking more and more about a scaling model.
okay,
And
okay.
so we started to, this happened very early on, that I developed a perspective. I mean, if you're an individual, you need source control, you need build management, you need package management, you need some kind of configuration management for provisioning. But that's the basics. And I say you do need those systems. I would not start even in a 2-person garage startup without those systems. Those are fundamental. You need them always. But then as you get into a team, then you need to start tracking requirements. You need to start tracking testing more systematically and defects. You may need to allow some way for people to access your system. That's the fulfillment execution. You need some monitoring. And so those all come online at the team level. And of course, the major concerns of the team are we building the right thing with the product management? Are we managing the work in progress? Because that is so important, the problem of queuing and too much work in progress, gridlock and overburden. And then do we have the ability to operate the system? And then you hit the hard transition from going from team to team of teams. This is still not well solved and not well understood in the industry.
Yeah, there are a lot of umpteen number of frameworks trying to answer that
Yeah.
problem. True.
Well, and I think the DPBoK is I think what we've done in the DPBoK, instead of saying that there's one way to do it, which is kind of what some of the frameworks like SAFe start to fall into that
Yeah,
trap a bit.
Spotify model, safe,
Right,
less, and all those things.
We're going to follow the Spotify model. No,
Correct,
there
correct.
is no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. And so what we've done in the DPBoK is lay out the options. in a very systematic way. You have a coordination problem. The coordination problem manifests itself along dimensions of time and scope and physical distance, organizational distance, you know, synchronous versus asynchronous, concepts like cadence and communication channel. You have to use these ingredients to develop a coordination strategy. And sure, there are certain patterns like a Scrum stand-up or a Kanban board. A Kanban board is an asynchronous, artifact-driven coordination mechanism. A Scrum stand-up is a synchronous, face-to-face channel coordination mechanism. They both have their place. But you need a language to systematically evaluate and assess these things and decide whether they are fit for purpose for the problem you're trying to solve. The DPBoK gives you that systematic language to then build your operating model. And it also discusses the agile impact on questions like IT finance, portfolio and project management. We do cover project management. It is not a leading concept here in the DPBoK, but we do cover it the same way we cover process management, not as a leading concept, but as a secondary concept. And then how do you organize? Yeah, Spotify model or what else? And where did the Spotify model come from? Well, it's just a variation of matrix management. Matrix management's been around for a long time. And there's multiple ways to do it. There's good ways and less good ways. You have to think carefully about it. And yes, there's a whole new set of systems that come online. You have to now have a portfolio management system because you have a team of teams. You have multiple products in your portfolio. How do you fund them? How do you control them? How do you make sure they're on track and that they're all working towards an integrated end? These are not simple problems.
I think this thought process is very radical compared to the PMBOK way of doing it, where you're inverting the iron triangle, like fix-it budget, and you've got long-term planning. Here it is smaller budgets, and money gets added on as you keep going, and it's a moving target. I think that's the need of the hour because this reflects the reality now. Than the project management philosophy which was there. I think you put in those points there, the value investing and having intrapreneurs within the company and fostering,
yes,
budding centers of excellence within the company. True. Yeah.
Exactly. You also have some practical coordination problems, which is why you might start to need a change control component, event management, formalized incident management. When you were a team of one team of 6 people, you didn't need a formal incident management process because when the system was broken, everybody drops everything and fixes it, right? And so your incident management channel is, basically, just talk to me on chat. But when you have a team of teams and maybe the incident involves 2 teams or 3 teams or 5 teams, you need some way to bring everybody together and to coordinate their conversation. So you need incident management. And then at the highest level, you have architecture, information management, governance, risk, security, and compliance. Now, key point, security has been there since the beginning. We don't wait until the enterprise level to talk about security.
True.
We cover security in the DPBoK, in digital fundamentals, in digital infrastructure, in application delivery. We're going to work
because
more.
Security needs to be a first-class citizen, and you cannot.
It's all the way through. It's a cross-cutting concern, but the DPBoK is correct in leaving it in the enduring enterprise level in terms of the fact that you don't hire a CISO until you're at an enduring enterprise level for the most part. Maybe you hire them as a team of teams, but you certainly don't hire a chief risk officer until you are a large enterprise. And that's at the point at which you really formalize it. Security before that level is more tactical. It's more opportunistic. It's like, what threats are coming at me? How do I respond? But when you're at an enduring enterprise level, you have to take the proactive stance of identifying your risks. You put them in a risk registry. You start to use tools like Archer. I've yet to see, a small companies implement Archer. You bring in Archer when you're a big company and you have a lot of risk to manage systematically to try to prioritize it.
What they call as a SOC and SIM and those kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Security. Yeah.
All of those things come online when you're really quite large. And by the way, you know, an enduring enterprise is, to me, is not a Fortune 500 corporation necessarily. You start to see enduring enterprise emerging when it's a company of about 200. You know, so enduring enterprise comes online pretty quick. And in my experience, the team of teams level doesn't last that long. Either a company stays as a team, or it passes through the team of teams journey and it gets to the enterprise. But I don't think team of teams is a particularly stable state in which to stay. Either you're going to go back down to just being a single app operating like a team, or you're going to have to make the leap into the enduring enterprise. But it is a phase, and it's a critically important phase.
Yeah, because the picture on the right, Charles, on your slide, which is the IT for IT slide, that may give an impression that we are going back to the waterfallish way of doing things, because there is this 4 portfolio stages, but then
Yes.
all these dots are so interlinked, and it's like a neural network. One influences another, and its
Right.
values derived iteratively, and finally what emerges out of it is an emerging architecture and design.
Right.
So out of that, I think that
Right.
that is something that, and that becomes very complex to actually
Yeah.
show the dependence between dev and ops and design and portfolio and strategy. But I
It
think,
does.
yeah,
It does seem a little waterfall,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's the. I mean, the life cycle exists, Kieran. I mean,
correct, correct,
in general, we take a decision to write some code. We write the code, and then we can run and operate it. I mean, that's common sense, right?
true,
I
true,
mean, so plan, build, run does exist, but it iterates very quickly. That's the
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a very fast iteration, and the overall life cycle is increasingly in control of the individual product teams.
True, true,
It is not something that is imposed top down anymore by a project management office or an enterprise process office. It is much more about letting the teams empower themselves with the right tools to get the job done. And as you say, then you have the emergent phenomena out of the overall neural network, you know, like a neural network. The phenomena is emergent. The value is emergent out of that network. It's a value network, not a value chain. But there still is directionality. I mean, I'm not also ready to throw out the idea of the value chain, because the value chain with a neural network, you don't really understand an objective. And so the
very true.
value chain still can clarify the conversation. A value stream can clarify the conversation about, well, what is the directional objective here? And so
Because there are so many contradicting and conflicting forces, all of it running simultaneously, from problem management to incident management to source and check-in and deployment and portfolio, vendor management, budgeting. So it can
Right.
look like a huge crisscross, although at the end of it, we are delivering value to our customers or the product mandate. But yes, I think showing, maybe that would be the next steps of the IT for IT stuff.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
show it,
No, and they're
like that.
continuing. They're continuing to evolve
Correct.
evolve the IT for IT. So I think I'll stop sharing here. This has gone really fast. I only have another 5 minutes or 5 to 8 minutes here.
Yeah.
So let me see. Where's my sharing? There it is. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're back to the original screen.
Yep.
So, yes, Charles, I think one thing I'd ask you, I think in one of your talks you did mention about a nice picture that you had put up, which is there's a river flowing in Minneapolis, and there's on the left-hand side, there is Carlson School of Management. And on the right hand side, there is computer science, software engineering department. And you took us through the Conway's law, and here is where people are teaching management. Here is where people are teaching software engineering. And that's a perfect dichotomy on how there can be a huge difference between the consumers of the knowledge and the practitioners of the knowledge.
Exactly.
And how, so what actually did you intend saying there? Because I also know that you are on the board of the education department way back in your home state. So you actually formulated the new ways of teaching people, especially with the emergence or the disappearance of PMBOK and so on, which is more into a product philosophy and that kind of stuff. What exactly
Right.
were you trying to illustrate with that picture?
Well, you know, I'm looking for I thought I had a hard copy of it here. Yeah, here it is.
That was a very nice way of talking about Conway's law, actually.
So what we did was we did a report. I wasn't on the board, but I was on a working group to create a report called Renewing the IT Curriculum, Responding to Agile, DevOps, and Digital Transformation. It's about 4 years old now, but it still is very relevant and current. The world has not changed that much in the last 4 years. We had this kind of big push. And really, it is about, you know, challenging faculty and educators to, you know, realize that Agile and DevOps and digital transformation are changing what the students need. And that doesn't mean that we need to, you know, turn all the colleges into vocational schools and have everybody just learn the Linux command line. There is a lot of really interesting theoretical problems. There are deep, deep subjects to be explored and researched and taught. But we need to move away from thinking that waterfall is the best practice. We need to be much more critical. Way too much curriculum still, you know, assumes that ITIL is the best practice, and I think it demonstrably is not. I think ITIL didn't even ultimately is not claiming to be best practice, just good practice or sound practice, and I would even question some of it there. The whole idea is that, you know, we're in a new world, and our students absolutely need these new tools and perspectives taught at whatever level is appropriate to the institution. At the University of Minnesota, it will be more theoretical. In a vocational school, it will be more practical, but the problem of digital transformation is moving across the board at all levels and needs to be addressed. And that's part of what we did with this publication.
Very true. I think to continue your story, it would have helped if the schools were on the same side of the river.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Maybe we could, you know, we can lead off with that. I couldn't find that slide quickly enough for you, but yeah, right, the business school. I mean, right now, if I want to be a product manager or a product owner,
True.
what degree do I get? If I go to my guidance counselor at the University of Minnesota and say, my big sister is a product manager, you know, with a digital company, I want to be like her, what degree should I take? You will get very diverse answers at best. There is no consistent answer. Some people will say you should be more technical. Some people will say you should be more business. The reality is it's somewhere in between. So, you know, how do we solve this? Because I think it's a super important problem in the new economy.
Very true. I think, Chance, that's a nice summary, Charles. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up now because we are nearing the top of the hour, as you said, and you need to move to other things as well. So we'll have another call on this, the part 2 of this next month, the early next month, as you said. And thanks a lot for sharing your time, and have a great weekend. I suppose we need a weekend.
Yep. Thank you. And you too, Karen.